Short is the story, long is the life.
Wukong's archive presents China Urban Legends, the Ancient Pagoda of Jinzhou. Hello everyone, this is Old Yang. Today I'm going to tell you about a place, the Ancient Pagoda in Jinzhou, Liaoning Province. The first time I heard about the Jinzhou Ancient Pagoda was in the winter of 2015.
At the time, I was working on cultural relic restoration in Shenyang. My unit had taken on a project in Jinzhou, a survey and assessment of the Guangji Temple Ancient Pagoda. It wasn't a big project, but its background was significant. The pagoda had been designated by the Liaoning Provincial Cultural Relics Bureau as a key monitoring project. The pagoda had developed a tilt, and a crack ran vertically from top to bottom through its entire body. A comprehensive structural safety assessment was needed. I was part of the restoration team, mainly responsible for documenting the preservation status of the pagoda's painted decorations and brick carvings. The project started in early November, and our team spent nearly 2 months in Jinzhou. Jinzhou is located at the throat of the Liaoxi corridor, a place contested by military strategists since ancient times. East of Shanhai Pass, past Heludio, you reach Jinzhou. During the Liaotian campaign, a decisive battle was fought here. In October 1948, the Northeast Field Army took Jinzhou in 31 hours, closing the door on the northeast and trapping hundreds of thousands of nationalist troops outside the pass. That battle was brutal. At just one position, the Matchwater Pool, a single battalion was reduced to fewer than 20 men. After the battle, when the battlefield was cleared, trucks spent days hauling away the bodies collected from inside and outside Jinzhou city. The Guangji Temple Ancient Pagoda is located in the Ancient Pagoda district of Jinzhou, right in the center of the old city. This pagoda was built in the 3rd year of the Qing reign of Emperor Daozong of the Liao Dynasty. That is, 1057 AD, making it nearly 1,000 years old. It's a 13-story, close-eaved, solid brick pagoda, 57 meters tall, with a brick and stone structure. Each of the pagoda's 8 sides features brick carvings of Buddhas, apsaras, and jeweled canopies. From a distance, gray bricks and gray tiles, standing under the gray northern sky, it looks like a giant stone pillar thrusting straight into the clouds. Standing at the base and looking up, even craning your neck to its limit, you can only see half of the pagoda. The other half blurs into a patch of shadow in the thin winter sunlight, indistinct. I arrived in Jinzhou on November 7th. That day, a north wind was blowing, and the temperature had dropped to -10 degrees Celsius. Jinzhou's winter is different from Shenyang's. Shenyang's winter is a dry cold, wind cutting like a knife against your face. Jinzhou's winter is a damp cold, wind blowing in from the Bohai Sea, carrying a salty, fishy moisture that seeps into your bones. After a week in Jinzhou, I noticed that the city's winter has a very special atmosphere. It's extremely quiet, so quiet that you feel something pressing down on the city from above. There aren't many people on the streets, and those who are there don't talk. It gets dark early. The sun sets at 4:30 in the afternoon, and by 5 o'clock the streets are empty. The old city around the pagoda is even more desolate, with sparse streetlights casting dim yellow light onto the uneven gray brick roads, stretching long shadows. We stayed at a hotel not far from the pagoda, about a 10-minute walk away. We arrived at the site at 8 every morning and finished work at 5 in the afternoon. To the east of the pagoda is Guangji Temple, now a cultural relic protection unit that also functions as a Buddhist activity site. The temple isn't large. One main hall, a few side halls, and 2 old locust trees at the entrance. Their trunks so thick one person can't wrap their arms around them. These trees are said to date back to the Liao Dynasty, nearly 1,000 years old. The trunks are covered in bumps and cracks, the bark curling up like wrinkles on an old face. In winter, the leaves have all fallen, leaving only pitch-black branches reaching toward the sky, clawing and grasping. The temple's incense isn't strong. During the day, A few elderly women occasionally come to offer incense, and by 4 in the afternoon the temple closes its gates. My daily work involved setting up scaffolding, climbing up layer by layer, photographing the brick carvings on the pagoda's body, recording the positions and widths of cracks, and marking areas needing repair on the drawings. Day after day, climbing the pagoda in the morning, organizing materials in the afternoon, going back to the hotel for dinner and sleep in the evening. Life was monotonous.
But it was precisely this day-after-day monotony that made what happened later stand out so sharply. Within the first week of joining the project, I noticed something strange. Old Liu from the Cultural Relics Bureau wouldn't let us touch the pagoda's base.
Old Liu's full name is Liu Guodong. He works for the Jinzhou Municipal Cultural Relics Bureau. In his 50s, round-faced and slightly overweight, wearing an old-fashioned pair of black-framed glasses. He speaks slowly, in the typical manner of a government official. He's been at the Cultural Relics Bureau for nearly 30 years, rising from a junior clerk to his current position as office director. All files and records concerning the Guangji Temple Ancient Pagoda are in his hands. He called a meeting with us to go over safety precautions and work regulations. After he finished, he paused and specifically emphasized one point. The base section does not require survey work. It's not within the scope of this project.
I immediately felt something was off. The pagoda's tilt problem was very likely caused by uneven foundation settlement. If the base had subsided or shifted, that would be the key to structural safety. But Old Liu was categorical, leaving no room for discussion, and said this was an official decision by the Bureau. Our team leader, Engineer Zhang, is a technical backbone in his 40s, with over a decade of experience in cultural relic restoration. He didn't say much after Old Liu's remarks, but that evening, when we were returning to the hotel, he walked with me to a noodle shop next to the hotel and we each had a bowl of noodles. Halfway through his meal, he suddenly put down his chopsticks and said to me in a low voice, "There's something under the pagoda's base."
I asked him what it was. He shook his head, saying he didn't know, but he had seen a survey record from the late 1980s in the Provincial Bureau's archives. That record stated that an underground palace entrance had been discovered beneath the Guangji Temple Ancient Pagoda, but the survey had been abruptly halted midway, with no reason given. He said he'd asked an old colleague at the Provincial Bureau, who only replied, "Don't ask. Digging up that matter won't do any good." At the time, I thought he was talking about a Buddhist underground palace. Pagodas from the Liao Dynasty typically had underground palaces beneath them, used to house Buddhist relics and sutras. This was the standard design for Liao Dynasty Buddhist pagodas, so I didn't dwell on it. My task on this project was to document the surface restoration, and whatever was underground was none of my concern.
But what happened later made me realize things were far from as simple as I'd assumed.
It was probably my 10th day in Jinzhou, a Saturday afternoon. A heavy snow had fallen, blanketing the old city of Jinzhou in white. The pagoda stood in the snow, gray bricks covered with white, a stark contrast of black and white. The snow was too heavy to do outdoor measurements, so I went alone to Guangji Temple, hoping to take some interior photos for documentation.
There weren't many monks in the temple. The abbot was an old monk in his 70s, his Buddhist name Shenyang. He was thin and wizened, speaking very softly and walking almost silently. He wore a faded gray monastic robe, the cuffs frayed, the collar revealing the edge of an old cotton padded jacket. After I finished photographing the main hall, I ran into him in the courtyard on my way out. He was sweeping snow, moving very slowly, each stroke deliberate, as if he were struggling with the snow, or perhaps as if he didn't care whether he could finish sweeping it or not.
I greeted him and made small talk. He asked if I was here to repair the pagoda. I said yes. He nodded, was silent for a moment, then said something that caught me completely off guard. "Don't repair the pagoda. The more you repair it, the worse things will get." I asked him why. He continued sweeping, head down, not looking at me, muttering as if to himself, "This pagoda has been holding things down for hundreds of years. If you disturb it, the things won't stay contained anymore.
At the time, I thought it was just superstitious talk from an old monk. In my years working on cultural relic restoration, I'd often encountered this kind of thing. People saying ancient buildings have spirits and can't be touched, that touching them will bring disaster. When I worked on restoring a Ming Dynasty drum tower in Datong, Shaanxi, the local elderly absolutely refused to let us touch it, claiming a dragon was pressed beneath it and disturbing the dragon vein would bring calamity to the entire village. But in the end, we repaired it, and nothing happened. So I'd always let such talk go in one ear and out the other.
But the old monk's expression made me uncomfortable. When he said those words, his broom paused for a moment, and he looked up toward the pagoda. That day the snow was falling heavily. The pagoda appeared faint and indistinct in the swirling snowflakes, like a gray shadow thrusting between heaven and earth. There was an indescribable look in his eyes, not fear, not awe, but more like weariness, a weariness of someone who knows some things but no longer wants to mention them. As if he carried a great burden in his heart, had carried it his whole life, and now, old and unable to carry it any longer, still couldn't put it down, had to keep carrying it. I didn't press further. At the time, I figured a monk saying something a bit mystical wasn't unusual. But after I'd taken 2 steps, he spoke again, his voice so low I almost didn't catch it. He said they dug there before. 3 people died.
I stopped in my tracks and turned back to look at him. He had already gone back to sweeping, showing no sign of continuing the conversation. The broom scraped across the stone floor, making a rustling sound, and snowflakes splashed up onto his shoes, but he paid no attention.
That night, back at the hotel, the more I thought about it, the more unsettled I became. The old monk's words, 3 people died, weren't just superstition, he was talking about a specific, actual event that had occurred.
I called old Lu. He answered. From the background sound of the evening news, he was apparently watching TV at home. I told him what the old monk had said and asked him directly. Had anything ever happened at the Guangji Temple Ancient Pagoda in the past?
There was silence on the other end of the line for nearly 10 seconds. Then old Lu said, I've only heard about it from the older generation. That business in '92. I've never really understood it.
1992?
Old Lu said that in the summer of 1992, the Provincial Institute of Archaeology organized an archaeological survey of the Guangji Temple Ancient Pagoda. The purpose was to investigate whether there was an underground palace beneath the pagoda base. If there was, following the principle of protection first, no active excavation, they would pinpoint the coordinates and scope, file it for the record, and not proceed further. The team was led by a deputy researcher from the Provincial Institute, surnamed Zheng, Engineer Zheng. He brought 5 people and a ground-penetrating radar unit. They conducted 3 days of geophysical scanning around the pagoda's base. The results showed that directly beneath the pagoda base, at a depth of about 4 meters, there was a cavity structure of approximately 40 square meters. The dimensions of this cavity were very regular, a square shape, 4.5 meters from east to west and 4.5 meters from north to south, with a smaller independent chamber at its very center, which perfectly matched the standard layout of a Liao Dynasty Buddhist pagoda underground palace. However, there was a problem. The radar signals showed that around the central small chamber there was a ring-shaped structure, like a circular corridor that enclosed the central chamber from the outside. In his 30 years at the Cultural Relics Bureau, old Lu had never seen such a circular structure in Liao Pagoda underground palaces. Not only that, but when he later consulted an old expert from the Provincial Archaeological Institute, the expert also said no such structure had ever been seen anywhere in the country. Engineer Zheng judged that this might be a special double-layer underground palace, an outer corridor plus an inner chamber. This would be of great academic significance. If confirmed, it would be a major discovery in Liao Pagoda archaeology. He submitted a report to the Provincial Bureau, requesting permission for a partial exploration of the underground palace entrance, just to confirm the entrance location, not to enter the underground palace itself. The Provincial Bureau approved it, but appended a note to the approval. Pay attention to safety. Stop immediately if anything unusual is found.
In mid-July 1992, the archaeological team began trial excavation on the east side of the pagoda base. They dug for about 4 days until, at a depth of 2 meters, they discovered a brick-built passageway. The top of the passageway was an arched vault, constructed with blue bricks in staggered joints, the joints filled with lime mortar. The masonry was extremely fine. After more than 900 years, there was no sign of collapse. The passageway was very narrow, only 60 centimeters wide, allowing only one person to pass through sideways. Its direction pointed straight toward the center of the pagoda base, exactly matching the radar survey results.
Engineer Zhang was excited. He judged that this was the entrance passage to the underground palace. Following archaeological protocol, he had the team clear the accumulated soil from the passageway, preparing for further exploration.
But on the 5th day, something happened.
Old Liu said that at the time, he was a junior clerk at the Jinzhou Municipal Cultural Relics Bureau, having just transferred there 2 or 3 years earlier, still relatively new. He hadn't directly participated in the 1992 survey, but he remembered the tense atmosphere over those few days. The phones in the bureau building rang non-stop, all calls from the provincial bureau. The leader's office doors were closed, and voices murmured inside, kept very low, impossible to make out what was being said. But that sense of tension spread through the entire building like an invisible fog.
On the afternoon of July 18, 1992, the archaeological team cleared the passageway to its end and encountered a stone door. The door was carved from a single piece of blue stone, about 1.2 meters high, 80 centimeters wide, and at least 15 centimeters thick. The surface of the stone door had no carving, no ornamentation at all. Just a bare stone slab, so clean it seemed unnatural. In that environment, a stone slab buried underground for nearly 1,000 years should have been covered in moss and alkaline deposits. But that stone slab was extremely clean, as if someone had wiped it just yesterday. What was even more unsettling was the edge of the stone door. The gap between the door frame and the door leaf was so narrow that even an ordinary piece of rice paper couldn't be inserted. This level of precision was nothing special by modern standards, but this was the Liao Dynasty nearly 1,000 years ago. For hand-carved blue stone to fit together with such precision was undoubtedly the work of the finest craftsmen of the time. Engineer Zhang took photos, made measurements, and then drilled a small hole in the upper right corner of the stone door. A standard archaeological survey procedure, allowing observation of the conditions behind the door to confirm the absence of harmful gases or collapse hazards before proceeding further.
After the hole was drilled through, Engineer Zhang shone a flashlight inside and peered through it for a while. He looked for about half a minute. Then he straightened up, and his face changed completely.
The team members asked him what he'd seen. He didn't answer. He just said, "Seal it up for now. We'll deal with it tomorrow." It was already getting late. The team sealed the passageway opening with wooden planks and sandbags and arranged for someone to stand guard. The person on duty was a young man named Xiao Ma, a driver for the Jinzhou Municipal Cultural Relics Bureau. He was just over 20, recently discharged from the military. He was local, bold, usually talkative, and full of laughter, always joking around. The team called him Brave Ma. That evening, he volunteered to stay at the site for the night watch. Before leaving, Engineer Zhang specifically warned him, no matter what sounds he heard, not to look through that hole. Xiao Ma waved it off casually, patting his chest and saying, "Don't worry, Engineer Zhang. I stood guard for 2 years in the army. I've seen everything." The next morning, when the others arrived at the site, they found Xiao Ma lying on the ground at the entrance to the passageway. His face was pale, his lips blue, his eyes wide open, pupils dilated, his mouth half open, as if he wanted to say something but was stuck. They called his name several times, but there was no response. He was rushed to the hospital. Doctors conducted a thorough examination, no external injuries, no poisoning, no stroke, all indicators normal. But he remained unconscious, his pupils reacting sluggishly to light, unresponsive to external stimuli. The doctors couldn't identify the cause and could only vaguely say he might have suffered severe fright. Xiaoma lay in the hospital for 3 full days before waking up. But after waking, it was as if his brain had been replaced. He didn't speak, his eyes were vacant, and when people spoke to him, he seemed not to hear them at all, his gaze passing through their bodies to fix on the wall behind. He stared at the ceiling for an entire day, refusing food and drink, neither crying nor laughing. Finally, he opened his mouth and said one sentence, his voice very small, so hoarse it was barely audible. What he said was, "There's a person inside the stone door. He told me to come in." Old Lu said he visited Xiaoma in the hospital once. Xiaoma's parents were both in the ward that day. His mother sat by the bed, wiping her tears. Old Lu stood at the door and saw Xiaoma sitting up in bed, his back against the wall, staring blankly out the window. Outside, the sun was bright, sunlight falling on the hospital bed, but Xiaoma's face was completely expressionless. Old Lu called his name, no response. He called again, still no response. After a moment, Xiaoma's lips moved, and he said something. Old Lu didn't catch it, so he stepped closer and asked him what he'd said. Xiaoma slowly turned his head to look at old Lu. His eyes were bloodshot, his pupils still abnormally dilated. He said he's been waiting for 900 years. Old Lu said that when he heard those words, a chill ran down his spine. He asked Xiaoma who had been waiting for 900 years. Xiaoma didn't answer. He turned his head back toward the window and resumed staring outside, as if he hadn't heard old Lu's question at all. Later, Xiaoma resigned from the Cultural Relics Bureau and returned to his hometown. Some said he went to Panjin and worked as a security guard in a factory, others said he went further away and was never seen again. But regardless of which version, one thing was common, he never mentioned what happened that night to anyone again. It was as if he had entirely excised that memory from his brain.
After Xiaoma's incident, the Provincial Institute of Archaeology urgently halted the survey. Engineer Zheng personally led the team to reseal the stone door, filling the passageway with cement mortar, backfilling with compacted earth, and laying new bricks on top. Everything was restored to its original state, as if nothing had ever happened.
Then Engineer Zhang returned to Shenyang and spent a week writing the survey report. The main body of the report was very professional confirmation of the underground palace entrance location, structural form mapping, dimensional data, and photographic records. But on the last page, in the recommendations for follow-up work section, Old Lu said he had secretly seen the archived copy of that report. In that section, Engineer Zhang had first written a sentence in pen, then crossed it out. He had crossed it out with great force, the pen tip almost tearing through the paper. But through the scratch marks, the sentence could still be made out. The inner face of the entrance stone door is inscribed with a Sanskrit binding spell. Content pertains to sealing. Recommend permanent closure. Never to be opened. Old Lu said that when he saw those words, chills ran down his spine again and again. He said Engineer Zhang was a man who had devoted his entire life to scholarship. Rigorous, rational, someone who never spoke of supernatural things. For a man like that to write the word sealing in an official report, he must have seen something that completely overturned everything he had believed in his whole life.
As for what he actually saw through that small hole, no one knows. Engineer Zhang never mentioned that detail to anyone. Less than 2 years after the survey ended, he took early retirement and returned to his hometown in Shandong. Old Lu said he tried to contact Engineer Zhang once afterward, hoping to fill in some details while organizing the pagoda files. The call went through, but the person who answered was Engineer Zhang's wife. She said Engineer Zhang wasn't well and couldn't come to the phone. Old Lu asked if he could leave a contact number and call again another time. The woman on the other end was silent for a few seconds, then said he doesn't want to talk about that pagoda anymore. Please understand. Old Lu never called again.
After Old Lu finished telling me all this, I was silent for a long time. Then I asked him, what exactly was that pagoda supposed to suppress? Why did Emperor Daozong of Liao build such a large pagoda here? And why inscribe a Sanskrit binding spell on the underground palace's stone door?
Old Lu sighed on the other end of the line and said something that made me even more uneasy.
In his 30 years of cultural relics work, he had read countless archives and local chronicles. After piecing together several facts about the Guangji Temple Ancient Pagoda, he had noticed some very strange coincidences. First, the construction date. The Guangji Temple Ancient Pagoda was built in the 3rd year of the Qing reign of Emperor Daozong of Liao, 1057 AD. Just 1 year before construction, the 2nd year of Qing, the Liao Dynasty experienced a large-scale internal rebellion, historically known as the Chongyuan Rebellion. The imperial uncle Yelu Chongyuan raised an army to rebel. Emperor Daozong sent troops to suppress it, and a battle was fought along the Luan River. That battle killed over 2,000 people, mostly rebel nobles and their personal guards. After the rebellion was quelled, Emperor Daozong ordered all the rebels' bodies to be disposed of. But historical records don't specify where they were buried, only vaguely noting, gathered the bones and buried them in Tokyo, the Tokyo being the area around present-day Liaoyang. But the Liao Dynasty's Tokyo covered a large area, including the entire Liaoxi corridor. Second, the Liao Dynasty built multiple high pagodas along the Liaoxi corridor, from the Fenghua Temple Pagoda in Yixian, to the Guangji Temple Pagoda in Jinzhou, to the twin pagodas in Beijing. These pagodas were spaced several dozen kilometers apart, forming a line. Old Lu said he had checked the construction dates of these pagodas, and they were basically concentrated in the 40-year period from 1050 to 1090. And this time interval exactly coincided with Emperor Daozong's reign after suppressing the rebellion. He suspected these weren't purely Buddhist structures but a suppression system, a formation of suppression objects laid out along the Liaoxi corridor using the power of Buddhist pagodas. Third, the Guangji Temple Ancient Pagoda occupies the most special position among all Liao pagodas. It is exactly at the center of the Liaoxi corridor, west toward Shanhai Pass, east toward Shenyang, north toward Fuxin and Chaoyang, south toward the Bohai Bay. Connects in all directions, the intersection of all routes. If Emperor Daozong really intended to use Buddhist pagodas to form a suppression formation, then the Guangji Temple Ancient Pagoda must be the very center of the formation. Old Lu said he had looked up a passage in a local chronicle, the brief gazetteer of Jin County compiled during the Republican era. He had specifically found it and read it to me. The Guangji Temple Pagoda was built in the 3rd year of Qing of Liao. Old traditions say this place was an ancient battlefield, with many bones underground. The pagoda was built to suppress them. Then there was another sentence. Beneath the pagoda there is a cave of unfathomable depth. From the cave comes a sound, like thousands of people weeping. After Old Lu finished reading that last sentence, I felt that even he on the other end of the line had fallen silent, as if waiting for my reaction. After a moment of silence, I asked him whether that passage meant. Beneath the pagoda there was a deep pit, bottomless, and from that pit came the sound of thousands upon thousands of people crying? Old Lu said, yes, that was exactly what the county gazetteer recorded. That was how the people of Jinzhou 300 years ago had documented it.
I called team leader Zhang and told him everything, what Old Lu had said and what the old monk had said. Engineer Zhang was silent for a long time on the other end, then said, don't overthink it for now. This line of work is like this, every ancient building has legends behind it. Some are based on fact, others are just folk tales spun by the people. Work is work. The Provincial Bureau assigned this project, so we have to do it well. He suggested I make some more local inquiries in Jinzhou and see if I could find more specific information.
The next day was Sunday. The snow had stopped and the sky had cleared. I went out for a walk, hoping to talk to some locals.
The single-story houses around the ancient pagoda were inhabited by old Jinzhou residents, families who had lived in this area for generations. I had breakfast at a steamed bun shop north of the pagoda and struck up a conversation with the owner. The owner's surname was Wang, in his 50s, lean, with deep wrinkles on his face, wearing an old cotton cap. He had spent his whole life making steamed buns by the ancient pagoda. When he heard I was here to repair the pagoda, the smile on his face immediately faded. He lowered his voice and said to me, "Young master, let me give you some advice. Don't touch that pagoda." He said that among the locals in this area, the pagoda was a place the older generation had warned children since childhood not to go near. When he was 7 or 8, his mother told him not to hang around the ancient pagoda at night, especially not to stand in the pagoda's shadow. Not because the pagoda might fall, but because the pagoda's shadow was unclean. Children had weak young energy, and if the pagoda's shadow fell over them, they might see things they shouldn't see.
He said when he was a child, he didn't listen. Once, he and a few other kids played by the pagoda until dark. It was summer and it got dark late. They were playing cards on the steps at the base of the pagoda, and before they knew it, it was dark. He remembered that night the moon was very big and very bright. The pagoda's shadow was stretched long by the moonlight, laid out diagonally on the ground, pitch black, like an endless black trench. They were having a great time when suddenly he felt a strange vibration under the soles of his feet. It wasn't like an earthquake. It was a low, continuous hum, like a huge machine running underground. Then his ears buzzed, and immediately afterward, he heard a sound. Not one person speaking. Many people speaking at once. A hubbub of voices. Indistinct, like a large crowd having a meeting far away, or like chanting. That sound didn't come through his ears. It came up from under his feet, through the soles of his shoes and the legs of his pants, crawling up along his bones all the way into his head.
He said he was so frightened he ran home as fast as his legs could carry him, gasping for breath. When he got home, he collapsed onto his bed. His mother touched his forehead, it was burning hot. He had a high fever for 2 days, and fever-reducing medicine didn't help. Finally, his mother took him to see a village shamaness. The shamaness burned a talisman for him, mixed it with water, and he drank it. The next day, the fever broke. Boss Wang said this happened over 40 years ago, but to this day he remembers every detail of that night, how long the pagoda's shadow stretched in the moonlight, how dense those murmuring sounds from underground were, how cold it felt under his feet when he stepped on the pagoda's shadow. Boss Wang wasn't the only one with such an experience. Several of his old neighbors had similar stories from their childhoods. The timing differed, but the descriptions were largely the same. Near the ancient pagoda at night, especially standing in its shadow, they would hear sounds coming from beneath the ground. Some said it was chanting, some said crying, and one person said what he heard sounded like something trapped deep underground, in the pitch-black depths, talking endlessly, calling for help, but no one ever responded. Boss Wang said a couple of years ago, there was a young backpacker from out of town. He was riding a motorcycle with a camera, stayed in Jinzhou for one night. He didn't know the local rules. He'd had a few drinks that evening and, emboldened by alcohol, wandered alone to the ancient pagoda. He climbed up onto the base to take night photos. Apparently, he was there for over an hour, using a telephoto lens and tripod, taking his shots quite seriously. After finishing, he went back to his hotel, but that same night, something went wrong. He started talking deliriously, had a high fever. The next day, his roommate took him to the hospital. The hospital ran tests and found nothing wrong, complete blood count, brain CT, electrocardiogram, all normal. But he lay in the hospital for 3 full days before recovering.
Later, before being discharged, the man said a few things to a nurse. He said that when he was using his telephoto lens to photograph the pagoda base, he happened to see in the viewfinder a row of blurry human figures beneath the pagoda base. They were wearing ancient clothing, heads bowed, standing in orderly lines, as if waiting for someone. In his moment of shock, those figures simultaneously raised their heads and looked in his direction.
He said that at that instant, his hand trembled, and the camera fell from the tripod, smashing heavily onto the concrete ground. The screen shattered, and the lens cracked. Later, when the camera was taken to a repair shop, the technician took out the memory card and tested it, saying the card wasn't damaged and the photos were all there, but when opened, every single one was completely black, with no image at all. The repairman suggested the CMOS sensor might have been damaged by the fall. But the backpacker said he knew it wasn't the fall that had done it. He had seen something he shouldn't have seen in that instant, and the camera had remembered it for him, but then something had deleted it from the very hardware level.
Back at the hotel, I barely slept all night. I lay in bed, tossing and turning, thinking about all those things: the old monk's warning, old Lu's phone call, Xiao Ma's ordeal, Engineer Zheng's Sanskrit binding spell, the backpacker's black photos, and Boss Wang's childhood fever that lasted 2 days without breaking. All these fragments came together, piece by piece, like a jigsaw puzzle, forming a picture I absolutely did not want to see.
I gave up on sleep, got up, and spent half the night researching.
I asked a colleague at my unit to pull the historical restoration records for the Guangji Temple Ancient Pagoda from the Provincial Bureau's electronic archives. The data came through to my email quickly. The documents showed that the pagoda had undergone at least 6 major restorations in its history: once during the dating reign of the Qing Dynasty, twice during the Zhizheng reign of the Yuan Dynasty, once each during the Changhua and Wanli reigns of the Ming Dynasty, and once during the Kangxi reign of the Qing Dynasty. Each restoration had stele inscriptions recording it. But there was a very suspicious pattern. Every restoration was concentrated on the upper half of the pagoda, from the 3rd level upward, the eaves and the spire. The pagoda base and foundation had never been touched. Not a single brick replaced. I noticed that in the Kangxi reign restoration, recorded on a stele still extant in Guangji Temple, there was a very strange passage. The inscription was written by the then prefect of Jinzhou, whose surname was Chan. He said the restoration was undertaken because tiles on the pagoda top had come loose, and bells on the spire had been damaged. So they raised funds for repairs. But he then wrote something that stopped me cold. The base is undamaged. Only where the bricks and stones are loose, we added mortar. We dared not dig deep beneath it. We dared not dig deep beneath it. Not there was no need to dig deep. Not it was inadvisable to dig deep. But dared not. A Qing Dynasty prefect used a very explicit dared not.
What does that mean? It means that over 300 years ago, the Qing Dynasty craftsmen and officials already knew there was something under the pagoda base, and they dared not touch it.
I dug through some other materials afterward. One Liao Dynasty local gazetteer mentioned that before the Guangji Temple Ancient Pagoda was built, there had originally been an earthen platform at this site that contained Yansheng objects. When Emperor Daozong built the pagoda, monks had suggested constructing it here to suppress the impure qi underground. Yansheng is an ancient form of sorcery, suppressing evil spirits by burying talismans or special objects. Burying Yansheng objects under a pagoda, building a 900-year-old pagoda to hold them down. This meant that the things underground, in the eyes of the people of that time, could no longer be contained by ordinary Buddhist suppression methods. They had to use Yansheng techniques to apply multiple layers of sealing. I also thought back to that circular corridor beneath the pagoda. Ordinary Liao Dynasty Buddhist pagoda underground palaces were simple square spaces, just large enough to hold a relic container. But the Guangji Temple Pagoda's underground palace had a double-layer structure, outer corridor plus inner chamber. This wasn't the standard design for storing relics at all. This was a purpose-built ceiling structure. The outer corridor and the inner chamber's dense walls formed an enclosed space, and the Sanskrit binding spell carved on the stone door was the final lock.
On the day the project ended, Jinzhou was hit by its second heavy snowfall.
The old monk was sweeping snow at the temple gate, just like the first time I'd seen him a month earlier, moving very slowly, very steadily, stroke by stroke. No matter how heavily the snow fell, he just kept sweeping, as if the snow would never be fully cleared. I walked over to say goodbye. He straightened up, looked at me, and asked, "You didn't touch it, did you?" I said no. He nodded, leaned his broom against the doorframe, reached into his robe, and pulled out a small cloth bundle. He handed it to me. The cloth was a yellowish-brown color, so old its original color and texture were indistinguishable, tied at the mouth with a red string that was worn shiny from being carried for many years. He said, "Keep it on you. You'll need it on the road." I said no, I didn't need it. He shook his head and pressed the bundle into my hand. His hand was very withered, knobby knuckles, gray-white nails trimmed short, but his grip was strong. He held my hand and pressed that cloth bundle into my palm, saying words I remember very clearly to this day: "If you never have to use it, that's best. If you do, you'll know what to do. Keep it with you. Think of it as an old man's small gesture." I thanked him and said I'd come visit him again if I had the chance.
He didn't say another word. He picked up his broom again, bent over, and resumed sweeping the snow. The gray-white snow was pushed to both sides of the path, revealing an ever-widening strip of blue stone. His back was hunched, the hem of his cotton robe swaying gently in the wind, the broom scraping across the stone floor with a rustling sound, one stroke, another stroke, as regular a rhythm as the temple's morning bells and evening drums. I walked a few steps, then looked back. He had already become a blurred gray figure in the heavy snow, together with the ancient pagoda, their outlines veiled by the white curtain of snow. The brick-carved Buddhas on the pagoda's body were also covered in a layer of white snow. The bodhisattva, originally with kind eyes and a gentle brow, now had half her face hidden under the snow, and somehow carried a hint of an inexplicable coldness.
On the car back to Shenyang, I leaned against the window, watching the streetscape of Jinzhou's old city recede frame by frame: drab old houses, bare poplar trees, a river surface covered with a thin layer of ice, until they grew smaller and smaller, more and more indistinct, gradually swallowed up by the long highway. I reached into my coat pocket and touched that small cloth bundle. Inside, it felt hard, like a small bone, or maybe a piece of metal. Through the thickness of the cloth, I couldn't tell what shape it was.
On the way back to Shenyang, I didn't say a single word. On both sides of the highway were harvested cornfields, bundles of withered stalks piled at the field edges, with a few crows occasionally perching on them, pitch black, motionless, staring into the distance. On the gray horizon in the distance, the outline of the Jinzhou ancient pagoda had been completely obscured by the white curtain of snow, as if it had never existed. I leaned my head against the window and closed my eyes for a while, but the images in my mind wouldn't stop: that cement brick I had pried up with my keys and silently put back, the strange grooves on that rusted iron plate, the withered, sunken fingers of the old monk pressing the cloth bundle into my hand, the look in Boss Wong's eyes when he lowered his voice at his steamed bun shop, a look that sent chills down your spine.
After returning to Shenyang, I couldn't let this go. I asked a friend who worked in the Provincial Bureau's Archives Department to pull a comprehensive dataset from the National Database of Liao Pagoda Underground Palace Forms, hoping to compare and see if the Guangji Temple Pagoda's situation was truly unique.
What I found only made my blood run colder.
There are about 20-some known Liao pagodas in Liaoning Province. Among them, roughly 7 or 8 have undergone archaeological surveys that confirmed the existence of underground palaces: the North Pagoda of Chaoyang, the Guangji Temple Pagoda in Yixian, the White Pagoda of Liaoyang, the twin pagodas of Chongqing Temple in Beijing, and so on. I looked at the blueprints of all these pagodas' underground palaces. They were all standard single-chamber structures. A square brick space with a stone or bronze reliquary inside, containing relics and offerings. Very simple. Not a single one had a circular corridor structure. Not a single one had a Sanskrit binding spell carved on the inner face of the stone door. The Guangji Temple Ancient Pagoda was the only exception. And as for that stone door that engineer Zhang had discovered and then resealed in 1992, old Lu later told me that what engineer Zhang had opened wasn't even the main entrance to the underground palace. That passageway was just a side passage on the outer layer. The true main entrance should be much deeper, directly beneath the pagoda base. Engineer Zhang's ground-penetrating radar had shown that after the passageway, there were about 3 more meters of compacted earth, and beneath that was the core structure of the underground palace. As for that iron plate, the one I had accidentally discovered beneath the cement brick, that rusted iron plate, Old Lu said there was no record of it anywhere in the Cultural Relics Bureau's files. He had no idea who had placed that iron plate there or when.
No one knew what would be encountered if that true main entrance were ever opened. And no one had ever really wanted to open it. ## epilogue. This happened about 5 or 6 years ago. To this day, I've never been back to Jinzhou.
I've kept that little cloth bundle with me all along. I changed several coats, moved twice, traveled to over a dozen cities for work, and each time I take that little cloth bundle from the old coat and put it into the inner pocket of the new one. I've never opened it. I don't know what's inside, and I don't want to know. The old monk said if you never have to use it, that's best.
Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think about that pagoda. I think about the old monk sweeping snow in the heavy snowfall, his retreating figure. I think about the 10 seconds of heavy silence on the phone when old Lu hesitated. I think about the flicker in Boss Wang's eyes when he lowered his voice to talk to me in his steamed bun shop. Not fear, but a complex, indescribable expression, as if he knew something but wasn't sure whether he should tell me, or as if he himself doubted whether what he had seen was real or not. I also think about that cement brick I quietly pried up with my keys and silently replaced, and the line engineer Zhang had crossed out with his pen tip almost tearing through the paper in his report. 900 years of pagoda. 900 years of sealing. Some things have been pressed underground for so long that everyone has forgotten they ever existed, so long that even the descendants of those who first sealed them can no longer remember why they sealed them in the first place. But that thing beneath the pagoda hasn't forgotten.
I still remember the words the old monk said when he pressed the cloth bundle into my hand, "Keep it with you. If you never have to use it, that's best." I didn't understand what he meant then. Later, I gradually came to understand some things are better left unknown. The reason seals exist isn't because the ancients were superstitious fools. It's because they truly encountered something they couldn't handle, something that exceeded their entire understanding of the world, something for which they could find no explanation. They could only use bricks and time to press it down, layer after layer, passing the knowledge down through generations, until everyone forgot it existed. Not because they were afraid later generations would dig it up, but because they were afraid future generations, like me, would accidentally touch something they shouldn't.
If one day that pagoda really falls, if someone really finds the entrance to that main door, if that Sanskrit binding spell that was crossed out and almost torn through by the pen tip is eventually deciphered by someone, I only hope I won't be there when it happens.
Because some things, after 900 years without answers, perhaps should never have answers. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe. New urban legend every day.